continue to go through the lesson here in chapter 13, which again is kind of a groundwork, foundational laying here for probably Judges' most famous judge, kind of a in conclusion, wrap up here the book of Judges, looking at Samson. And as we got into this last week, we looked and began to kind of talk about the continued sovereignty that we see all throughout the book of Judges. In that, regardless of the consistent mistakes of the Israelites and the cycle that we've seen take place over and over and over again, God's sovereign hand has orchestrated all the way throughout. And we've noticed that even in the midst of their oppression, even in the midst of their persecution, because of their own fault, God always raised up a deliverer to help remove them from the oppression, to remove the enemy away from them, as long as they were being obedient and faithful to Him. And we kind of talked about, as we finished up last week, the story of Samson's kind of how it got started, right? And the groundwork that is laid in chapter 13 as we went through the first 5 verses for the responsibilities from the sovereign, of course, which would be God. And we noticed Manoah's wife, which of course is Samson's mother, and how they had been barren and unable to have children for quite some time, and how the Israelites saw that barrenness as, God directly involved in that, right? God was withholding children from them for whatever reason. So when there was this angel of the Lord came down and had this pregnancy announcement, right? They threw it up on the Israelites' Facebook at the time, or however you want to talk about, however you want to see it. But he's there and he's announcing the birth of this child, that the Israelites, even in the midst of some of their not serving of God, recognized that this was a big deal, because this meant everybody knew that she was unable to have children, and now she's with a child. So they would have known God specifically intervening. And we said that was very specific, right? Of all of the judges that we've looked at, none of them have been greeted with this angel of the Lord announcement of his birth, right? So it kind of shows that there's some difference here in Samson compared to the other judges. God took special instance here to make the angel of the Lord come down and kind of announce his birth, which is a big deal, right? Because son, as we saw in verses 2 through 5, and we'll read them again here in just a second, just to kind of give us a refresher, but it shows here that Samson would belong to God. God is going to use him for a very, very specific purpose. In this case, of course, beginning to deliver Israel from the Philistines. So this was a momentous occasion within the Israelite nation, because this was a little bit different than the other kind of judges that were being brought up at the time. All right, so let's read the first 5 verses of Judges chapter 13, just as a quick little recap, and then we'll jump right into verse number 6 and get to point number B up here, which is the requests for the sovereign. All right, so in the children of Israel, of course, we've seen this a ton of times, right? Did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered him to the hand of the Philistine for 40 years. And there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold, now thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine, nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing, for lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the children shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, we mentioned this last week too, right? When there's a first pregnancy in the family, right? There's usually it's a big deal. You put the announcement out, and people are congratulating. Everybody's excited. And last week, Haida was very excited when we found out we were pregnant with Pippa, and it was a big deal. We were a big deal, and was hard for us to keep it a secret for a while. We wanted to make sure, we told her mom, my mom first, then we had the whole thing, right? The whole rigmarole. A little bit different when Moxie came around. We weren't maybe quite a little more of a surprise. We got excited, obviously, very quickly. But we all kind of know how that kind of goes, right? What we don't see here on record is Manoah's wife, like a song from Manoah's wife. We don't have a record of her like jumping up and down at the news of having a son. What we do see, though, was the revelation was about God's ownership of Samson, right? And then right after that, we see some very detailed restrictions that are placed on both Manoah's wife and on Samson, to further emphasize the ownership that God had kind of placed on her son. Right, the son was going to be a Nazirite to God, and being a Nazirite means what? Can't cut your hair, right? It means being dedicated to God for God's use, right? You can't cut his hair, and other things that kind of go along with it as well. But essentially means dedicated to God for God to use, okay? So there was restrictions, as we saw verses 3, 4, and 5, that God put on Manoah's wife, to keep her essentially from being defiled while she was with child, while she was carrying Samson's. The restrictions then that were put on Samson were there for what reason as well? To keep him undefiled as well, right? They're the same restrictions that were there for him, to keep him being undefiled during his time as a Nazirite. Now, if you will, please, jump over to Numbers, chapter 6. And we see here, I know the heading in my Bible, this is the first 12 verses here, just called Nazirites. I don't know if yours has that or not, but mine does. If you look at Numbers chapter 6, verses 1 through 12, we see some more description here of what it meant to be a Nazirite. Okay, and we're going to read through this just because I want to kind of just pull this out and let you all see what it meant to be a Nazirite. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazirite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled, in the which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and he shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. All the days that separateth him unto the Lord he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean for his father or for his mother, for his brother or for his sister when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. All the days of his separation he is holy unto the Lord. And if any man die very suddenly by him, and he hath defiled the head of his consecration, then he shall shave his head in the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day shall he shave it. And on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtles or 2 young pigeons to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall offer the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering, and make an atonement for him, for that he sinned by the dead, and shall hallow his head that same day. And he shall consecrate unto them the Lord the days of his separation, and shall bring a lamb the first year for a trespass offering. But the days that were before shall be lost, because his separation was defiled. Right? So, what does it mean to be a Nazirite? Consecrating yourself to God, right? You make a covenant, make a vow, consecrating yourself to God, and it's something that once you are a Nazirite, right? You're a Nazirite till you die, okay? And there are things that you have to follow that make you separate from other people. Now, were there other Israelites who were godly, who were following God, who were being obedient to the laws during this time? Absolutely, right? There were. Were they different than the Nazirite Israelites? Yes, there's a distinct difference there between an Israelite who is just an Israelite and an Israelite who has consecrated himself or herself as a Nazarite, okay? And you kind of see the things that had to take place in order for them to be a Nazarite. Now, in Samson's case here, God wanted him to be a Nazarite unto his death also. Nazarite consecration was something, though, that an Israelite could take on, right? It was a voluntary thing that usually was voluntary for an Israelite to become a Nazarite. It was a decision we made, kind of to liken this the same way, back probably more so a couple hundred years ago, we had, ladies who would go into to be a nun. They would make the vow to the church to be the nun and follow all the things. You've got men going to monks or to monasteries to be monks and making certain vows to be very kind of along the same lines here. They could go in, you could decide that you're going to be a Nazarite, you'd take the vow, and then you were a Nazarite until your death. Now, Samson, on his instance here, he was not given a choice, right? God told his mother that he was going to be a Nazarite while he was still in the womb. Both of these instances, him not giving a choice, usually an unusual addition to the Nazarite standing here to reinforce that Samson was to be God's man for God's job. Okay, just a quick thing I've spoke wrong. Once you're a Nazarite, it wasn't always until you died. You could come out of being a Nazarite. I had that, just make sure I make that point. Usually, so an Israelite wanted to be a Nazarite, he could make that choice, and then if he wanted to no longer be a Nazarite, then he could remove himself from that as well. It just kind of showed, though, a separation. Samson was not that. He was not given those choices. He was going to be one until he died, and God was the one that kind of made him or chose that for him. Now, we see in Numbers there, chapter 6, as well as in a couple verses in Judges 13, there are some pretty detailed things that had to be taken care of, right? And there would be conscious decisions that Manoah's wife was going to have to take, conscious decisions that Samson was going to have to take, and then continue to take for him to continue to uphold being a Nazarite. There were some things there that, some of them probably not as difficult, some of them more so difficult, but regardless, things that had to be taking place. So, because Samson now in his womb of his mother has now been picked to be a Nazarite, told that he was going to be a Nazarite, have to follow these rules because of him being a Nazarite, do you think that this calling from God on Samson's life was unfair? No. Okay. Then care to explain why? Okay, good, right? So we go right back to our point, right? Because I have mentioned this before, and I can distinctly remember Grandma Compton about, probably 10 years ago. I don't remember what I was teaching in Sunday school, but she had been down visiting, and she was here, and I had made this statement one time, Uncle Tim was around too. I had made a statement that God was not fair, right? And I was kind of getting to the point that we can't reason how God reasons. So what we think is fair is unfair is kind of told God is not fair, he's just just, right? And she was like, God is fair. Well, no, but I'm not. Yeah, he is, but I'm not in terms of. You should have said that. God's fair. He's always fair. Well, I know, Grandma, what I'm trying to get. Then Uncle Tim kind of jumps in and says, well, he was trying to explain. Same concept here, right? When we think of fair and unfair, we can't paint God into that bubble. Right? Because from a human standpoint, it's pretty unfair that Samson didn't get a choice in being a Nazarite. Right? When we look at it just from a surface value, from a human standpoint, if God showed up to Haley when she was pregnant with Moxie and said, "You all need to do this," and you have no choice, right? To us, would we have followed? I hope so. We would have tried. But that seems a little unfair, right? Well, why can't she pick? But in God's sovereignty, right? He is not fair. He's just simply just. It's just right or wrong. It's what he says, and that's the right way to look at it. So while we can see from a human standpoint, this seems somewhat unfair to Samson, it's not, because it's God's sovereignty, it's God's way, it's God's will, it's what he wants to be done, therefore it's just and it's right. Okay? So in what sense here is every follower of God considered God's person for God's job? In what sense is every follower of God considered God's person for God's job? Or there is a very defined, definite reason, right? That I was born in 1988 over in Abington, and my parents lived up on that. We always came to this church, and you all taught me, right, through Sunday school, and brought me up through Awanas, and then there is a very specific reason that God put me in the position as far as where I'm at, how I learn, because he knew that at some point Faith Bible Church was going to need an adult Sunday school class teacher, right? He knew at some point that I was going to have to do this. Now, when I was 3, 4 years old, never even a thought, right? Never even any idea at all, even in my teen years, right? Never even a thought this would take place, but God was specifically orchestrating certain things because he knew we would need this, right? Same thing with Pastor Rob, right? He knew that at some point we were going to need a pastor here at this church. So he put specific things in line, specific things took place so that when the time was needed, he is God's man for God's job, right? The same thing with Sunday school teachers and people who are driving the Awana buses and helping with Awanas and doing all the things that you all do in this ministry as well. You all are God's people for God's specific job. And we at the time, right, no concept of that, right? Pastor Rob's 16 years old, probably never thought about being the pastor of Faith Bible Church, right? Never had any concept of that. But God knew, and he's God's man for God's job, right? And that's how God's sovereignty works. Now, there's maybe some things that happen in each one of y'all's lives that to you seemed unfair, but God had specific things that were taking place to put you where he needed you in the time that is appointed. Okay? So, that sense, every follower of God is exactly the person for the job that God wants done. That shows God's sovereignty. Now, I think that is a point that we as Christians, and maybe it's just me, that we take for granted a lot of times, right? We don't really grasp the concept that there are things in our lives that, the tumultuous at times, the waves are tough, the path gets a little bit bumpy, and we don't really like it because it hurts a little bit, but there are specific things that are happening to us in our lives because God has a purpose that we can't see. Right? God sees the forest for the trees. We cannot a lot of times, and we can get to a point in our lives where we can kind of remove ourselves from the situation, right? I know this stinks, this is no fun, but this is here for a purpose. I'm thankful for this difficult time that's going on. I'm thankful for this trial. I'm thankful that God called me to be a Nazarite and that I can't shave my head because God has a purpose. When you can get there and see that, right, you are really showing some spiritual maturity, and God can really use us, each one of us, in a very, very mighty way. Now, we're going to see in the following lesson here that God's truth in Samson's life became very, 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 very important. He used the Nazarite's vow to expose Samson's tendency to do his own thing, right? We know how the story goes. We're going to get to that next week. All right, so that brings us down to verse number 6, requests for the sovereign. Now, what did the wife focus on in her report to Manoah? All right, we're going to read verse 6 here, and I want you to kind of pick out what was the focus here of Manoah's wife when she tells him the event that just took place with her. Then the woman came and told her husband, saying, A man of God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel, very terrible. But I asked him not whence he was, neither told me he his name. What was the first thing that Manoah's wife tells to Manoah? What does she get hung up on first? What the appearance, right? The appearance of the man of God, right? The appearance here is something that really stuck out to her, that she doesn't go in and tell him, hey, guess what? We're going to have a baby, right? She takes time to explicitly kind of explain this angel of the Lord that came and talked to her. Now, There's a reason for that, right? Clearly here, this verse 6 in this account is meant to draw our attention to God rather than Samson's parents or even Samson himself, right? There's a reason this is written in the way it is. The appearance of the angel of the Lord must have been particularly spectacular for Manoah's wife because she had trouble describing him, right? What word did she use in verse number 6? Terrible, right? She uses the word terrible here in an attempt to kind of relate what she saw. The word terrible here means, fear-inducing, awe-inspiring, like really taken aback when she saw this. So being in this awe, right, she did a couple of things that you think a person who wasn't in awe probably would have done, right? She neglected to ask the messenger's name. She didn't ask where he came from. And she wondered if the man of God was actually an angel. So to her, the origin of the messenger was important because the truthfulness of his message had to have hinged on what his identity was. So this person she'd never seen, this creature, man of God, shows up, never seen before. It's awe-inspiring, it's fear-inducing to her. She can't really even describe it, but it's important to her because of the magnitude of the event revealed the truthfulness of what he was saying. Let's go to verse number 7. She then goes to relay what the message is in verse 7. Behold, he said unto me, but he said unto me, behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and now drink no wine, nor strong drink, nor eat anything unclean, or any unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Okay, so she goes on to relate the message about him being a Nazarite. Now, if you remember, if you jump back up into verse number 5, what detail does Manoah's wife leave out? Verse number 5. He's going to be the deliverer of Israel, right? She leaves out the detail that he was going to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. Okay? She doesn't mention that to her husband. Now, we don't have a reason anywhere in Scripture here for the reason that she omitted this, I think, pretty important detail. It's likely that just simply the thrill of what had just taken place, she just kind of forgot, right? That's 100% a real possibility that took place. She just found out that she's been trying for so long and she's going to have a baby. An angel of the Lord came and told her that she was going to be with child and going to have a baby, and then gave her some instructions that kind of gave her the Nazarite vow, which she would have recognized, right? Because she would have known what was going on with the Nazarite vow. So it's pretty understanding to realize that she maybe just kind of forgot, right? That the angel of the Lord told her that he was going to deliver them out of the Philistines, and she kind of just simply repeated what she heard first, and that was kind of what stuck into her brain. So I don't think the fact that she left that out was nefarious in any way. I think she probably just forgot. She probably, on second thinking about it, going back later, she probably remembered him saying that. But in the excitement of everything, she kind of left that detail out. Now, verse number 8, we see the response here of her husband. Okay? He was not totally satisfied with what his wife was saying, but he had some sensing here that this was a pretty divine message. So we see his response. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O my Lord, let the man of God which thou didst send come again to us, and teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. So what is Manoah's response? What's the first thing he does? What's the first thing we see Manoah doing? praying to God, right? This is a good thing, right? How many times have we seen this happen in Judges? Not very many, right? Not very many at all. So this is a good response. This is a good thing, right? This is a good event that took place. This is what Manoah should have done, right? His wife comes in and tells him this, and she doesn't really question her, right? He goes straight to God and prays. Send him back again so we can learn more, so we can figure out everything that we need to do. He's prayed to the Lord for more information. He wants here to be clear on exactly what they were supposed to do in raising Samson, right? He wanted to know every parameter, every detail. He wanted to be exactly clear. He wanted to hammer out all the things to make sure he didn't mess anything up, right? He wanted to be sure that he was doing exactly what God wanted them to do. Very clear on raising the son. This again gives us a hint, right? The response here of his parent, of Samson's parents, gives us a hint that God's word and God's truth are going to be very, very, very important in Samson's life. Right? Very, very, very important in Samson's life. Look at verse number 9. And God hearkened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again unto the woman as she sat in the field, but Manoah her husband was not with her. What does God demonstrate here by listening essentially to Manoah, answering his request and reappearing to his wife? What does God indicate here about himself by answering Manoah's prayer? Important thing here. He granted the request, right? Not only is God sovereign, if God didn't send the angel of the Lord back to Manoah's wife, would God still have orchestrated sovereignly in Samson's life? Absolutely. But because Manoah's wife were concerned to make sure they didn't mess anything up in any way, they asked God to give them more information. He answers their prayer, right? So it shows us that although, yes, God is sovereign, it was going to happen anyways, he still listens to the prayers of his people, and he doesn't just listen to them, he does what? He responds, right? He listens and he responds. So the angel of the Lord comes back while Manoah's wife's out in the field doing whatever, working and doing whatever. And it's funny to see her response. Look at verse number 10. And the woman made haste and did what? She ran, right? And showed her husband, and said unto him, Behold, the man hath appeared unto me that came unto me the other day. 11 and 12. And Manoah arose and went after his wife, and came to the man, and said unto him, Art thou the man that speakest unto the woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, Now let thy words come to pass. How shall we order the child, and how shall we do unto him? And the angel of the Lord said unto Manoah, Of all that I've said unto the woman, let her be aware. She may not eat anything that cometh out of the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe. All right, so we see he shows up. She goes back instantly to get her husband. And Manoah comes, sees the man, asks, Are you the man, angel of the Lord? The man replies, of course, with, Yes, I am. And the angel of the Lord here then states on Manoah's question on what they're supposed to do about raising this child. He simply just restates the instruction that he had already given Manoah's wife. He just re-emphasizes that it's really important that she follows these instructions. She observes and follows these. He implies here is the fact that he kind of already told them all that they needed to know about Samson. He just kind of reiterates the point, tells it to them again, and tells them it's really important that they follow these things. Okay? That brings us now to verse number 15, as we've read down, and we see now the reverence for the sovereign. Okay, Manoah's wife Manoah and his wife still do not know what the messenger of the Lord, in wanting to treat him properly, they offer him a meal. Jump all the way down, if you will, please, to verse number 18. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? So Manoah took a kid with a meat offering and offered it upon the rock of the Lord, and the angel did wondrously. And Manoah and his wife looked on. For it came to pass, when the flame went up toward heaven from off the altar, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar, and Manoah and his wife looked on him, and fell on their faces to the ground. But the angel of the Lord did no more appear to Manoah and to his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord, and Manoah said unto his wife, We shall surely die, because we have seen God. But his wife said unto him, If the Lord were pleased to kill us, he would not have received the burnt offering and a meat offering at our hands, neither would he have showed us all these things, nor at this time told us such things as these. So the angel of the Lord refuses the meal, but suggests that Manoah offers up this burnt offering to God. And then we see, of course, in verses, down to verse 20, 21, they go ahead and offer up this burnt offering to God. The angel of the Lord, if you look at verse 18, Why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? Kind of asked Manoah a question here. So he asked the visitor what his name was, so that when his boy was born, Manoah, he would be able to credit the visitor for the blessing. The angel of the Lord then asked Manoah why. He asked about his name, and the King James Version here finishes the Lord's question with the phrase, verse 18, seeing that it is a secret. The idea is that the angel of the Lord's name is wonderful and is beyond understanding. So when Noah asks what this guy, the angel of the Lord's name is, and he doesn't give it to him, tells him, it's a secret, can't know that thing. So obviously it has some wonderful power within it, or this beyond understanding of what the name is as well. Okay. In what sense is God's name or character beyond understanding? And this is what I want to finish with today. In what sense is God's name or character beyond understanding? In what sense is God's name and character beyond our understanding? Why can't we fully understand God? We can't, right? Why? What's the reason we can't understand God fully?
We have human brains.
We have human brains, right? And God doesn't work on our human concepts, or our human time, right? Or our human way of explaining things, okay? And I feel like a lot of times I'm a pretty good explainer of things, right? I have to teach teenagers, right? Some of those teenagers are really dum-dums. They're real dum-dums. So I've got to really be good at explaining things to them, all right? And I feel like I do a good job at that a lot of times. But even as the best explainer in the world is, he or she is not able to explain what every aspect of who God is, because we can't understand him. He gives us bits and pieces of his character, reveals himself to us, right? So we can understand part of him, understand portions of him that he wants us to. But the fact that we can't fully understand everything about who God is shows again his sovereignty, right? If we knew absolutely every aspect of God, right, and then his sovereignty would be pointless. Okay, his ability to do the things that he does would be pointless, because we would have everything kind of understood and know why he was doing what he's doing, and there would be no lessons for us to be taught. Okay, within his character and us being unable to fully understand his character lies his sovereignty. I can't understand, right, why God put the things in my life to get me here to teach adult Sunday school class, or to get me in Wise, where I live at now, to teach teenagers, right, or how the circumstances in which he brought Haley and I together, which is just totally on a whim. No idea. Just one of them crazy things that happened. I was out eating with my friends. She was out eating with her friends. We just saw each other. We knew each other from school, and that's how it happened. Right? The rest is history. It was the greatest love story ever. Right? We don't understand. I don't understand how that happened. Right? But if I knew every aspect of God, then I would have a concept of that, and I would be more willing to put myself ahead of God's plans to try to thwart what I thought was right, because I already knew what God wanted to go, what He knew was going on. Okay, so He doesn't reveal His name to Manoah because Manoah, even if He told him His name, Manoah couldn't understand it and wouldn't be able to grasp it, and there was no sense in even giving him those things to ponder about, because his little pea brain wouldn't have been able to do it. Just like our little pea brains can't understand God's character, and that in turn shows His sovereignty and how He orchestrates things. We're going to continue to see this. We'll finish up next week with the reward for the sovereign. Just 2 verses real quick, and then we'll jump right into chapter number 14 and start looking at Samson. And it'll probably take us a couple of weeks to get through Samson, but the first thing we'll look at with Samson is Samson had an eye problem, right? And we'll look at Samson's eye problem and what caused some of the problems that he had. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank You again for the lesson that we have here. Thank You for everything that You've done for us as well, Lord, and being able to look at these lessons in Judges and being able to see exactly how things have taken place and the lessons and truths You've taught to these people, and then being able to see the response as well, and then the results of their response. Lord, it's been a great eye-opening experience for us to be able to study this and see how just with great brevity, with great sincerity, with great care, You take us being faithful in totality to You, not just partially, entirely, which is what You require of us, Lord, and what You expect, and that's what we should follow up with as well, Lord. So I pray we continue to see those things as we move through these last couple of chapters. Lord, I pray for Pastor Rob as well as he comes here in the next few minutes and has the message You've given him for us today, Lord. To keep us attentive to the word that You'd have for us as well. And in Your name I pray. Amen.